Hello, everyone, and welcome to Amped Up. We have a remarkable depth of experience joining me here on stage today. I'm really excited to welcome Marmer, founder of Signature Electric, Gabriela Favaron, Director of EV Infrastructure at 7Gen, and Theresa Cooke, Head of Global Customer Success for Siemens. I'm very excited to have this group walk you through their experience with designing charging infrastructure for delivery fleets. It goes without saying that the real change when you go EV is that you become self-reliant. You're supplying your own predictable power without relying on a pump. But it's definitely not something fleets are accustomed to, and so we're going to take a deep dive today and hopefully answer a lot of your questions. So we're going to start with Theresa. Can you talk about how you have to change how you even think about the procurement process for a project like this?
Yeah, so great to be here. And I would say the analogy I want to give today is we're on a mountain trek. We're on a mountain trek, all of us in this room, and many people who are not in this room, to get to fleet electrification, to get to that clear blue water and that sand of where we want to go. But there's going to be 4 mountains in front of us before we get there. The first mountain is Mount Vehicle. And on that mountain, I'd say today the weather is the clouds are parting and the sun's coming out because the models are coming, the TCO is coming down, the production capacities are getting there, and people are getting excited. People are getting into these vehicles, and people are seeing that, yeah, I can see myself doing this. So I think Mount Vehicle we're almost there. I'd say the longest lead item on Mount Vehicle is human buy-in. And so what we need to do is keep working with all the people who aren't here today, all the people who aren't bought in necessarily, who might be afraid of what this means to them, get them excited. And that might be in your legal team. That might be in your HR. That might be on the customer side, your neighbor. So we have to bring that buy-in. That's the longest lead item I see on Mount Vehicle. Then we go to Mount Infrastructure. Mount Infrastructure is a little grayer, I'd say, in terms of the weather right now. We have really long lead items on base electrical equipment. We have 60 weeks on bus duct, 60, 70 weeks on switchboards, transformers in the 12 to 18 months. So we really need to get ahead of that long lead item, plus the grid connection itself. So you need to work with whatever you've got. That's the place to start. But then you need to be aware that you're going to have a step function if, as soon as that grid connection is needed, you've got to get onto the wait list and get started on that process, because that's a 12 to 18 month or even longer process depending on how many megawatts you're going to need to have added. The other thing I'd say, the critical compass that we need to climb Mount Infrastructure is a site plan. And I'm going to go further and call it a system site design, which means you need to go to your site with someone who understands electrical load, someone who understands electrical supply, someone who understands how the vehicles are going to move on that site in this new world. And then you've got to do the layout of how these pieces are going to come together and have a bit of a basic operational concept. And once that's documented, that's not a PhD thesis. That's a 10-pager, with the results of that. That is your compass. So I don't want to see anyone on Mount Infrastructure without the compass, okay? Because that is critical. Okay, so then if we move on to the next one, which is Mount Software. And we were just talking how I think we're not all quite onto Mount Software yet. So Mount Software is the vehicle telematics, the charging software, but that's a limiting term. I think we need to talk about the energy management software, the site load, not just the charging, the site, everything that's happening, which means you have to bring fleet and facilities together onto one platform, you can have APIs, but it's got to be one system that gives you that data. And then you've got to get legal and commercial on board to start buying SaaS, right? Or figuring out the T's and C's behind that software. And then you have to have a data strategy. So do you have data residency requirements? Where are you storing that? What are your, all of that kind of stuff, right? And your IT is going to go through a whole change because they're not, IT in the past is Outlook, SAP, stuff like that. Today and tomorrow, it's going to be IT and OT. And if you talk to an IT department, they're like, oh, OT? I need to secure that. I need to deliver that. So that's a transformational change on the software side as well. So we'll get through that. And then the next and final mount is mount operations. Mount operations means we need the right vehicle assigned to the right route with the right charge, so that at the lowest cost of energy, charged at the lowest cost of energy, such that we complete our duty cycle. So how are we going to do this? It's been done with pen and paper to a large extent, and still today in some cases. We're going to have to move to a software, an algorithm and a computation to get to the right place. And Siemens is developing this, other companies are developing this. We need to come to that point so that we can deliver this transformation at an economically valued rate, or a more competitive rate. So that's mount operations, and then you have to think through, okay, so let's say I've got all that data, and now I see a risk, okay? The vehicle is coming back late, it's not gonna have enough time to charge. What's the workflow process to act on that risk? Who's gonna call who? I heard an amazing story from a transit agency who's done a lot of electrification saying, my control center calls my depot, but they don't pick up the phone. Because the depot is like, this is my depot, man. I don't take calls from anybody. I got this, right? This is my space. It's not even about another vendor. It's the same organization calling itself, and it doesn't pick up the phone. So that's where I go back to the longest lead item is human transformation, is human buy-in. And so as we look towards the beach, and we will feel the hot sand between our toes one day, but the only way we're going to get there and that beach will instantiate is when the last person on the trek gets to the beach. So we have to be thinking who is not here, who's on the last, just starting the journey, how are we going to get them? Because that's when the beach will take place.
Theresa, I love that you started with this change management and human management and human transformation as part of that. But also one of the things that you were talking about is really this need for analysis, evaluation, and really having that plan and that roadmap in place as you try to tackle your mountain trek. And that is where Gabriela comes in. And I'm wondering if you can talk about some of those key considerations as we get into that planning and evaluation process. What are you thinking about when you're going in to design a system like this and pair your vehicles with your chargers and your operations? How does that all come together?
Yeah, no, basically using the same analogy and metaphor here, when you're actually preparing to a big hike, like you're actually thinking, yes, how can it be successful? So essentially how we are actually planning and bringing all the items essentially for this approach. So essentially, when we're basically planning for fleet electrification, we're thinking about three main aspects of this system, which is essentially defining the location, defining the customer operations or fleet operations, and defining the electrical assessment. So basically that's what she was mentioning. So I think we are mastering already in terms of the vehicle piece. We do understand today a good comparison in terms of vehicle operational needs, how much range you are going to need. Most often fleet managers know how you're going to basically approach your basic deliveries during the day. Your payload, duty cycles essentially. And I think it's important that we understand what is actually the vehicle that will be comparable to that inside of the TCO model that we actually are developing. So that's something that we already know. Where it gets trickier in terms of this backpacking and hiking plan here is when it gets to the facility level, because we really need to start thinking actually where I'm going to be charging these charging stations. Essentially, I'm going to be using public charging. We don't have an infrastructure that is today widespread in Canada, at least in the US is also struggling with that. So we have to charge this at our own facilities. So now we're dealing with multiple stakeholders, essentially. We're dealing with landlords if the facilities are leased. We're dealing with real estate as well, like in terms of land owners. We're talking about government pieces in terms of bringing sustainable buildings as well, how we're actually incorporating that. We're talking about utilities, like how actually we're coordinating this with utilities to have the actual power bringing to that facility. And that brings to the last point that we need to be planning ahead, which is the electrical infrastructure, which is the site planning, the design planning at all. When we're talking about home charging, we're basically talking, okay, we have a charging station, usually 30 amps, like we are basically allocating to our panels that we have at home. Most people already changed, like, your breakers, like, so you kind of know how it actually works in terms of your panel and distributions. But when we're talking about fleet, like we're talking about 30 vehicles, like 60 vehicles, 100 vehicles with huge battery packs, like we're actually having to understand how the actual distribution system works. That means from the utility transformer, from the switchgear, the main switchgear, the main feeder, the transformers, and the distribution to the charging stations. And that also includes all of the loads of the facility. So not like considering the operations that the customer is actually bringing, which is the EV charging, if you have any engines, motors, like if you have actually forklifts, like it's going to depend on all of these. So it's really important that you map out this in a concise way. You actually walk through the site with people that actually understand about all of these items, that can elaborate a plan for you and understand actually what is the best recommendation. Let's install the chargers here, let's do like this, and yeah, that's the general recommendation. And yeah, I think it's important for people to start thinking this way, because it may seem complex. It may seem that we need to get buy-in from different areas, but I think that that's going to be the direction we're going to go, essentially, as electrification designs go. So
if we think about sort of coming back to our metaphor, Mark is really, in a way, the person who is on that trail and who is making sure that the group is all together and kind of leading the way on site. So can you talk a little bit, now that we've talked about sort of all these layers, really what the process is, that walkthrough that Gabriela is referring to? What happens when you walk into a site and someone is saying to you, I want to install a DC fast charger or 30 AC level chargers? What do you do next, Mark?
Right. So in a perfect world, we'd have 2 years to plan. We'd have a blank piece of land. They're going to build a building. We'll tell them where it's going to go, how much energy we're going to need, where the trucks will get perfectly parked. And that, at the moment, in this climb up the mountain, we're not quite there yet. What happens is I get all this lovely information. We're having a sequential charger. We're going to have a backup charger. And the trucks are going to be parked here. I've got 4 lines, 6 vehicles coming. And then I get to walk in and look and see what the service looks like and where it's located. And I have to figure out how to work from that, because frankly speaking, these things are already contracted. They're coming, and we got to figure it out. So we had a couple of slides up earlier, and I thought we would focus on a couple of locations that we've already worked together on, the 2 sort of unique locations. So we have one that's sort of a very older building, probably from the 50s. It's now a warehouse. But at one time, if you walk through the building, it was obvious to you that there was manufacturing there at one time, and all kinds of things were left over, panels and transformers and all kinds of things. So what did we find? We found something good. They already had 480-volt transformers, exactly the size that we wanted, in place. So that meant we didn't have a shutdown and we didn't have to buy a transformer. That was great. Any downsides? Well, it's an old building. The outside wall was asbestos. It needed to be tested. We couldn't cut through the wall. How are we going to get around that? We had lighting. We didn't put the lighting on the wall. We had to go up on the parapet. The soil needed to be tested. It's an old building. We're going to dig it up. This is going to be an issue. And of course, inevitably, it was just where the trucks were, as far as you can get from the electrical service. And all of these little things are delaying the job. Now I need testing. Took another week. So, okay, it's a week. The week is 3 months away, except this job needed to be done by Christmas. And we ended up in the freezing cold just before Christmas, getting the last few pieces in. So, as much of this planning as we can do ahead of time, it's helpful. But you have to deal with what you have. Luckily, the surface was big enough, and we were able to manage it. And it was an interesting installation. It had these sequential chargers, which were a bit of a new product, I think, even for Siemens. So there was a little bit of time Siemens sort of getting it set up and what have you. But everybody worked together, and the project, thankfully, it came to fruition, and it's being used now.
Mark, can you explain sequential charging just for just a quick understanding? Those were 150 kilowatt sequential chargers on that site?
It's interesting. So it's a 150 kilowatt sequential charge. So we have a charging hub, that 150 kilowatt, and we have 4 bays where the cars can go in, where the trucks can go in. And when you say sequential, it means it's in sequence. This truck pulled in, it's number 1, it's getting charged. When this truck is fully charged, it will go to the next one, and so on. This has already been sort of worked out. We knew that was going to work for the duty cycles of the trucks, and it was fine. And this can be more involved. We can have, at some point, looking in to see which battery is it and which would we like to do first. In this case, the sequential was working fine for this customer, and you have to look at another thing. Is the product available? I have to put it out there. So, it's nice to have something, but if it's going to be a year to come, it's just not working. There's contracts in place, and we got to keep moving. Yes? So the other location, which we just finished recently, in that case, it was a Lion 6 truck, so a little bit bigger vehicles over there. The other site has 15 19.2 kilowatt chargers, and there we have vans. The delivery vans that bring your Amazon stuff to you and what have you, similar size to that. And literally a brand new building, like so brand new that half the building wasn't built. They were still a hoarding up in the middle of the building, and they were still building the back of the building. So even that little piece caused us a little tension, because we would have liked to have the chargers back by the back of the building, but we couldn't even access them at that time. And again, we have a time frame. The trucks are coming. It's all done. But it looked great. And we had all these services inside. It was sort of subdivided so we could have, as it turned out, they took the whole warehouse, so which is fine, one tenant. But we had it subdivided so there could be multiple tenants if you want to put a wall up. So you got a service here and a service here and a service here. So that was great. We used 2 of those services, and only partway through did we realize that one of the services wasn't actually turned on. It never occurred to us to worry about that. And you think, well, that's not a big deal. We'll just turn the switch on and we're good. And then you go in and it turns out that it's not exactly that way. The utility says who's going to own the service, who's going to open the account. Turns out some of the metering wasn't finished yet. And it sounded like something so simple. I think it took over 2 or 3 weeks to get the service turned on. In the meantime, we're struggling at the other end. The trucks are already there, and we're doing it. So, even a brand new building had its challenges, but we're thrilled to see the service there, and that made a big difference. And sometimes the simplest things turn out to be, this is still, right, we're just at the bottom of the mountain here yet, and we're learning, and every time we learn something, we get better at it. So when you get a good team, that team has this learned knowledge, and we don't have to start from scratch at the bottom of the mountain again. We already climbed to the first plateau. So something like the retractors. These retractors, we use them all over the place, and they seem to be perfectly fine, except when you have 15 truck drivers 10 times a day pulling on the retractors, it turned out they couldn't quite manage them. The retractors had sort of a stop on it, and it was a little awkward for them to do it, and some of them are broken. So we're working. It's not a problem. We understand this as a learning process. We're looking to find a different type of retractor. We're doing some testing. We've already replaced some of them. So there's just a lot of pieces that come together. I mean, I really could go on and on.
No, but I think you bring up a really good point, which is the team that you bring in a team that has this experience and can guide you through this process. And I think, Gabriela, it would be great to talk a little bit about how 7Gen works to bring that expertise together and sort of your role in doing that.
Yeah, essentially 7Gen, we're basically a fleet electrification company. We do all at once, essentially the financing, we purchase the vehicle, we purchase the charger, and we deliver that in a leased model for our customers, essentially in one single monthly bill. And we take care of all of this. So we partner up with a lot of companies like Signature, for example, that will deliver the full turnkey for our customers. So that we are basically, it's a lot of work. Like it's a lot of risk, upfront risk that our customer needs to take. Like it's a lot of knowledge and curve. So we take all of this risk to support our customers, essentially how actually they can scale up their operations. Like, they are not on the EV infrastructure business, like they are in their own business. And we want them to be successful because this way is the same way that we are going to be successful. My role essentially is to make sure that actually they have the charging infrastructure in place before the vehicles arrive. So that's the key aspect of planning and designing everything. We of course advise that we of course are tied by the vehicle manufacturer delivery times. But it's really important that if I say in terms of recommendation, you start your charging strategy before you're actually having the vehicles, because it may take a lot of time, like for you to actually understand and us to bring all the equipment times and everything like for you. So we want to make sure that your operations are not going to be compromised like by like the vehicle lead times and everything. So that's my role, like in supporting this ecosystem to just make sure that all stakeholders, from government, utilities, our EPC partners, everybody, engineers, everybody's actually collectively collaborating as a team to actually have everything done smoothly for our customers.
I just want to, these customers are taking a risk. They are early adopters. Everybody took a risk. 7Gen took a risk. Siemens took a risk. Bull Logistics took a risk. From my end of it, I have to understand that I'm part of this too, and I have to try to make this work for you. I can't just say, well, it's just unfortunate that's not going to work. I need to understand that I'm part of this, we're part of this as well, and we need to support the team, and we can't just say, well, I can't just meet that deadline. What can we do to do it? So it's very important. Contractors, I think, tend to, they look at drawings, they see it, they do it, and if it can't get delivered, well, that's an extra or whatever. No, you have to understand you're part of this early adopter situation.
Yeah, so we've been talking a little bit about timelines, and you brought up a good point, which is you do not want to be installing charging in a deep freeze, even though I saw you in the video with the Cooke. So maybe this is a good time to chat a little bit about timelines and all the pieces of the puzzle that come into that, whether you're talking about some of the lead times that Gabriela and Theresa have been referring to, or some of the incentives and funding to support the project that you're looking to secure. Mark, I wonder if you could kind of give a big picture of how you pace out a timeline and what that could look like.
I'll tell you what the worst thing that can happen is you have to increase the size of your service. This becomes out of your hands. You have to, if anything that's on your side of the meter, you might be able to manage. I'm begging Siemens for a transformer to come, or a panel to come ahead of the line, or to put a slightly smaller panel in and change. We did this at the Richmond Hillside. We had to put panels in temporarily and move them out later on. Whatever you've got to do, but once you need to change the service, you are now in the hands of the local utility, and we talked about it briefly earlier. 12 to 18 months is nothing unusual. Forget the cost. The costs rise like crazy, but this is really a problem. So, I think that everybody's agreeing that we want to get in as early as we can. I have to say, I just don't think it's actually a reality. Where did the jobs come from? They're customer led. They're led by, we get leads that come from truck manufacturers. Truck manufacturers have gone in, sold the job. We may have the customer, maybe Canada Post had announced a few weeks ago that they're going to be green. They mean it. They're going to buy these trucks. Okay, well, here's where they're going to go. Make it happen. So as early as we can, I suppose.
And that's basically a big responsibility, and from our end also to facilitate the conversations with the local utilities, because for this specific project, for example, like we had a good relationship with Electra, who actually is committed with the EV charging. It is committed with supporting new EV infrastructure projects. But still, there are lots of constraints internally, and understanding what those constraints are will support us actually in determining expectations for our customers, essentially, when they actually can expect a new transformer being into the facility, or what actually we can do to support them in the meantime. Let's say what we can actually offer in terms of operational resiliency in terms like before actually they install this they bring the new service to the facility. So I think that we all have to play a role of facilitating these discussions with the utilities, right? Like, and we have a really good landscape in Canada in terms of utilities. We have a good cost of energy here. Most of our power sources come from renewable source of energy as well. So I think that that's a key aspect that we have to be thinking. Like when you are actually navigating this in the US, when you have like, fights between utilities, like, sometimes in the same jurisdiction, I think that's where we can learn a little bit more of actually how we can collaborate together to have better aspects of the development.
And just to add a couple things, so on the mental model, we're progressing, I would say, along, first of all, starting with the vehicle. Everyone gets the vehicle. It's like tangible, it's easy. It's like you're renovating your bathroom. I don't know what you think about. Do you think about the rain head, the shower head thing, or do you think about the heated toilet seat, or like this tangible things we think about, right? And we're like, yeah, I'm gonna get the vehicle. And it's not, and then we might think about the charger. I kind of get that. It's like, I've got my phone. Okay, I guess I'm gonna need that charger, right? So we can kind of remember that part. Can we then remember the electrical power distribution? Starts to get mentally harder, right? Can we think about the T's and C's of the SAS? It's getting tough, right? So, but we've got to do this, at least some of us have got to do this, because otherwise we will be on sites with vehicles and chargers procured, and Mark's got to sort it out and give you the bad news. So we've got to somehow collectively mature this a little bit, because the reality is that the project won't execute until all the pieces are there. Now, Mark's got a great point. Whatever you can do within your utility service, do it. That's the sweet spot, right? But then get in line for that multi-year process. We can buy you time too with microgrids, storage, right? We can buy, so we've had situations where customers really had like a couple years, they were just told, sorry, it's like a couple years, like we have to build a new substation, so, it's not happening. Like you have to imagine, we're talking about, you start in with 2 megawatts, each megawatt is like, let's say, give or take 1,000 homes. So it's not a joke, like to bring that amount of power, right? So you've got different solutions to buy time. But the other thing is, I'm on the board of Electric Mobility Canada, and all these different kind of policy, anyone who's doing advocacy, your GA, we've got to get in front of governments, provincial governments, and say, look, we need regulatory support for utilities to become innovators and supporters and active, proactive movers in this space. Because we can't make this transformation happen if utilities, and it's not their fault, but they're regulated, they are funded a certain way, and it's get in line, because you're no different than anyone else who's been waiting for their grid connection. So that at a collective level has got to change. And there's been some really interesting studies recently out of New York State showing that the cost of, because it's been a debate, should utilities really take on this challenge? In California, they've been mandated to do it. But is that fair? But it's been shown that the revenue return would end up making it cost neutral for the ratepayer, which is the critical topic. So I think we need to look regulatory to see how can we. This is going to be a huge bottleneck that we're going to have to work through collectively. But from the fleet perspective, do what you can within your service and get in line for the upgrade.
Now we're going to start to picture the beach. We've been really dwelling a little bit in the infrastructure build and the capital required and the grit and the effort required. But I want to talk a little bit about the beach and what operations look like when you've climbed the mountain and kind of the sunny side. So Theresa, I'll go back to you to sort of paint that picture for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're looking to have a transformation which is digital and electrical at the same time. And that's going to open up a whole new level of, first of all, driver and customer experience, which is really fulfilling. I think if you look at NACV's run on less vehicle, they have a lot of testimonies from drivers who talk about they enjoy this driving experience so much more. I'm a mother of 3 young children. I cannot wait until these school buses are not idling and noisy. And I mean, I love these drivers. Like, God bless these guys who are just, it's hard to drive a school bus with all these children in there. So I think that's what I'm looking for, and the digital aspect will give us so much more cost efficiency because we've got to manage the electrical loads on all the sites. And so I think that gives us one big leg up. And the other part of the beach is the integration of these. These are going to become power plants, and they're going to become proactive parts of the grid with V2G and other parts of that. So you can imagine now all these fleets, all these depots, everywhere we drive around, now that I'm in the space, I'm like, they're parked there and there and there. They are all going to become little mini distributed energy hubs. And we have to tie this to the grid so that it makes sense, so we can actually afford this, right? And so that's part of the beach, that it all is working together, and so that the total cost is reasonable and is optimized and is resilient.
So I want to leave some time for questions. So if you have questions, I'm going to ask you to come to this mic here, but I'm going to give you each like 30 or 45 seconds. Why is it important for fleets to start moving now in 2023? I know we all say, oh, we have 2030 goals, but why is it important to start this process now? Mark, I'll
Sure.
pass it to
You know what? I was impressed with something I heard yesterday when IKEA was talking. They really made a commitment across the board to do this. And they said, we really are all early adopters. It's hard for all of us. But don't leave everything to IKEA. Let some of these other people get on board. Try where you can. I was speaking to a waste company yesterday. It's a very big waste company with all kinds of vehicles. Some of the vehicles are just not ready yet. They have multiple sites. It's hard. It's hard to make these decisions. And they said, you know what? Maybe we can just do some of our smaller vehicles that are available now. We'll get people in the seats. Let them drive the vehicles, be advocates for us. And you know what, when those trucks are out during the day, maybe my employees can drive their electric vehicles and they'll plug in here. And that'll be a good news story for everybody and a way to at least to get started. That's a possibility.
Oh, definitely. I think, speaking over this conference and other meetings also, we see that like one day in this industry, it's basically 1 year. It feels like a year, essentially, like of learnings and development and being ahead of the game. So I think the most important aspect for a fleet to start electrifying right now is to be ahead. Is to be already in 2030 thinking, right? Let's not arrive there when we have mandates, when we have to actually they gotta push. Let's be ahead of it, to be strategic planning for the future. That brings a lot of support, because essentially we are building that together, so you can actually tailor that to actually what your needs are going to be. So if you're a fleet operator today, you know that the best approach and the way you're going to package that later will be, I know that those are the charges I'll need today. I need 5 charges for my fleets. I'm planning ahead and I'm thinking, okay, by 2030 I'll have 100, for example, in terms of forecast. So I can start planning today and saving some upfront costs even later today. And I can be learning together actually how I'm going to improve that later as well. So I think it's really smart thinking on actually how we're designing this today for the future. We have to start thinking also that new technologies are coming. So there will be a really mix of the current infrastructure and data. So we haven't touched much about the software piece here, but the load management will be one of the things, crucial things for government reporting, for incentives aspects as well. So I think the more we integrate data and the more we start collecting today, it's going to be relevant for us to actually start building and bringing back to the government saying, okay, we need more incentives here, or we need more support in that area as well. And it's smart enough for also fleet managers who are managing their fleets, because they will know exactly how to actually optimize their fleets today. Today with ICE vehicles, you might have a reference, but with a software capability, you'll really understand and optimize that in a way that makes your operations smarter. So I think that's the way to go, essentially. So.
Yeah, I mean, if I were a fleet today, number one reason is competitive strategic advantage. Do you really want to be left behind? So I think that's, for a fleet perspective, to me. Number two, it's the right thing to do. Noise pollution, air pollution, it affects the most vulnerable in our society. And never mind then, obviously, the GHG targets. It's becoming more competitive, it's becoming easier, and as Canadians, we have a generational level economic opportunity. So I think if we don't, then we are squandering that economic opportunity, and we're leaving an outdated and polluting transportation system to our children. And I don't think that's what we're here for.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Yes, go ahead.
Jean-François Lapierre from CAFU. Thanks for the metaphor. I thought it was a very good reflection of where we are. A bit scary at the same time, but I think it's exactly the situation that most of us are living here today. In terms of concretely fallback plans, mitigations, or redundancy system that we need to put in place as we build our EV fleets, what's the most frequent options that we have here today on the table?
Mark, I
That
don't
we
know.
should
Yeah,
consider
I
as
mean,
part of the
if I want to think about one of these projects that I talked to you about with the sequential charger, with the sequential charger went, credit to 7Gen, it was part of their plan, a 50 kilowatt charger. So what's a 50 kilowatt charger doing there? Remember, it provides an option. At some point or other, Siemens is going to need to shut this down for a few minutes to do some maintenance. These trucks still need to move, have something else. One of the things, maybe Gabriela talk about having things a bit more portable and stuff, and I mean, you could speak to this,
Yeah,
right?
essentially, that's also CAFU, right? Like, I understand you guys also do some mobile charging as well. So I think that's one of the items about operational resilience we're also thinking today. Actually, how we can, bring the power to site and then charge that. That's going to be more importantly. I think other aspects we also didn't touch today, it's on the battery integrated solutions and microgrids. I think that's going to become more and more important, actually, how we actually bring additional power to the site, but from renewable source of energy as well. How we actually bring battery integrated solutions that, while they're on site, they're going to be able to reduce your demand charges. So you're basically going to be paying less, when you're basically managing your whole infrastructure costs. And essentially incentivizing more public charging and mobile charging, for everybody, because in any case, you're not just going to drive your vehicle and get back to base all the time, right? You're going to have extended trips, and how you're actually going to serve that later. You will need players like you guys, and others to actually have mobile infrastructure in place as well.
Thanks for that. Sorry for self-promoting.
Yeah.
No, but resilient.
That's first mobile fast charging solution.
Yeah.
But when I think about the Mobis site, this is a very, very large warehouse. Frankly, they're leasing, so the roof is not theirs. But if it was their warehouse, or that the landlord would consider it, there's an enormous opportunity for solar on the top of this roof. So these are other possibilities. As these integrations that you talk about, there's other possibilities. We just have to leave it open. We have to think when we're designing the system, have a little view for the future, huh?
We have to have many layers of resiliency, right? Mobile chargers, spare parts, cables. Cables have problems. Low voltage and medium voltage equipment has problems. Do you have preventative maintenance, corrective maintenance? What's the call time for on-site support? Who is doing it? And how are you executing that? What is the system behind getting that support? And if you have a language, you're in Quebec, you have a language thing you've got to handle, or what, right? So I think there's a lot of steps to be thought through. And then there's the power side, right? What happens if power goes down, or voltage fluctuation? That's a power, thing from Powerland, but you can have all of these different issues. So you've got to think through all the layers of resiliency, from electrical, digital, human, so that, because your uptime, your vehicle duty cycle is not an option, right? You can't maybe make it. You're gonna have to make it. So you have to work back on all the failure points and mitigate them one by one. And I don't think that's gonna necessarily also be cheap, right? We have to forecast. There's been so much focus on CapEx, but we have to think about the OpEx.
Hi. I have a question in terms of communication with the utility companies. I've heard from many of the panelists that is an important aspect because it is the largest or longest lead time that we have. What conversations is involved with that communication and negotiation with them?
So I think, first of all, it's the outreach and making sure that you have the right contacts. Because I was talking to a utility and I was saying, oh, how much truck, have you talked to some of the trucking fleets? And they said, yeah, you know what, they're not our top customers today, so we don't really know. So it's interesting because you can think the utility has a customer outreach department, which is structured around its top customers, who are not fleets today, but they will be very soon. So the way the utility operates is going to have to restructure quickly. So what you have to do is sort of like help to trigger that and be like, hi, I'm subpar for you today, but guess what? In a few years, I'm going to become as big as one of your biggest industrial customers. So I'm now a new top customer for you. And that dialogue has to start and has to percolate in the utility as well. But I'd also, it's not they're the bad guys. They are operating under a very strict regulatory framework. So we also have to work with our local governments, our local stakeholders and say, look, I need something different in this system. Otherwise, I can't meet these targets.
No, yeah, and basically, just to add to that, actually, what the utilities are seeking is data. They need to have informed decisions based on actual data, and they need to be ahead as well, to discuss. So when we're basically, just to give you an example about BC Hydro, for example, BC Hydro has one of the incentives planned is the BC Hydro Fleet Ready Assessment. So they are incentivizing their customers to actually start this designing process, to start hiking up to the mountain, let's say, and giving you an incentive to start doing this. So we need more utilities to think actually on how they're going to be collecting more smart way data and incentivizing people to electrify. So I think it's a good start there, when actually they're putting forward more of these plans. So that's it.
That's great.
So as we are seeing different manufacturing are adopting the different charging standards. So what's our view regarding the standardizing these charging standards, how the approach you have taken?
Yeah, maturing charging standards is really key because there's a lot of gray zones in these standards today. And that means that basically people have there's a lot of freedom and variability in how the standard is implemented. So the other day I was talking to Switch, and they have, for OCPP, they have a grade of 0 to 14. So it's not like, oh, are you OCPP compliant? Yeah, I am. Okay, but what does that mean? We have to go into the details of that. Secondly, even if, let's say today, you're a 13 out of 14, firmware update on you or on the charger or on the vehicle, boom. So I say it's like 2 children, preschoolers, they can be playing nicely at 9 o'clock. They may not be playing nicely at 4 o'clock. So that's a little bit where we stand with these standards. And there's a lot of work going, that is known. People are working on the different standards committees. And so that needs to get accelerated so that we settle this situation down. But from today's standpoint, it means make sure that there is interop testing, at least a certain validation done between the vehicle and the charger, or put it in the T's and C's that this will be done prior, because what you don't want is that you're live doing interop, right? Because that's happened, right? It was like, oh, we're testing this. And we did that in the Q-Trick interop test with Brampton Transit, the buses out there. That's what that whole project was actually about, was let's put different chargers, different manufacturers, different vehicles, and let's see what happens. And indeed, there were challenges. So we worked through those, but yeah, I would say request that interop to be done, but just recognize that just because you did it once doesn't mean that now when the firmware is updated, then now you're still good. I've also been advocating that Canada puts in place a kind of like an Altoona, like a test center that would publish online that OEM X with firmware Y has been validated, April 2022 or whatever, with charger X, Model X, firmware X. Because then at least you could look it up and say, okay, yeah, it's been tested publicly, right? But I don't know. So if anyone agrees with me, we can we can work on that. But that's I think that would help the industry standardize also.
What about the charging gun standards? It's different OEM doing CHAdeMO, some do Tesla is doing the supercharger. So standardizing that charging gun standard.
Yeah, I think in general we're all working towards the same set of standards.
Probably a question for Theresa. You talk about the infrastructure and it's a little bit more murky. Yeah, we've really found that our biggest holdup is the electrical equipment. So it's getting panels. It's keep getting delayed. So I just wondering what your outlook is for the future related to electrical equipment and availability.
Yeah, I texted one of our business leaders in that panel business last night just to say where is it at? Because I talked to you a few months ago, and it's like, yeah, it's still like, it's not just us. It's like North America. The demand, everything's electrifying. The demand for electrical equipment, base electrical equipment, is just so strong, and factories are full. So we've got to make the investments, like collectively, to get more capacity for these, for all of these basic electrical supply. And we know, at least now in this room, everyone now knows, like, electrical equipment is long lead. So we've got to build, the collective answer is to build more capacity. And I mean, I think it would be cool to see it more in Canada, or at least a buy US, buy Canada kind of thing that allows more supply chain to be built up. But you're competing with the massive, like Microsoft new data centers buying, 100 million of this and this and this. So your small order for your, thing is like, you're competing with that, because that's just the scale of electrification that is happening today.
That's another reason probably why you get started now, right, Mark? Is that if you can get in and start planning and start understanding and start considering, you have the timelines to accommodate that, I
Yeah,
imagine.
for sure. We were these 400 amp panels. We called, how much longer do I have to wait for this? She says, well, you're not a hospital or a school, so that's where they're going right now.
Yeah.
That was the answer.
And we received essentially we purchased the whole component, and it just arrived in closure. So what are you doing with enclosure? Where are the electrical equipment? How do we plug and play here? So yeah, there are lots of constraints. We are working hard with all manufacturers actually to expedite production, let's say. But yeah, it's this landscape we have to walk through. It's getting better. So it's at least like we see some of the top of the mountain, let's say. But I think it's after pandemic years. We saw like some things going down, some mini crisis, but now we're seeing like it's improving, let's say. So
I'll be thrilled when I don't have to stock wire and panels in my little dinky shop. Be thrilled.
Well, thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed it, and enjoy the rest of your day. There's lots of sessions going on, and do take some time to speak to these folks, either out on the show floor or after the session. Thanks, everyone.